We're going to answer the question, is the U.S. losing its hegemony for the dollar and its ability to regulate global markets? It absolutely feels that way, and there are a lot of data points to support that, and we're going to go over them. Earlier in March, when President Putin visited China, no, other way around. President Xi went to Russia. I'm sorry. President Putin said that Russia would start using the Chinese yuan for international payments. Now, Saudi Arabia is in talks to do the same thing as well, and also work with Iran to create an economic alliance. This would cut the US dollar out of major global markets and sort of lay naked the dollar as it stands, because the dollar is backed by a belief system and literally nothing else. No gold, no hard assets, a whole lot of debt. Former Assistant Treasury Secretary Monica Crawley was on Fox News this weekend, and she talked about how that fall from grace will in fact be very painful for all of us that are used to a dollar-backed global system.
Look, since the end of World War II, the dollar has been the safe place to go, and it's been backed up by a couple of things. It originally was backed up by gold, but President Nixon took us off the gold standard, so there's no hard asset backing up the dollar anymore for the last 50 years. But also it's been backed up by the strength and economic power of the United States and the fact that oil has always been traded in dollars. If that were to end, that would mean the end of the U.S. dollar. Look, there is a perfect storm happening right now, Will. The world's reserve currency being that, having that status has been a real privilege, but we've abused the privilege by wholly reckless monetary and fiscal policies over many years, certainly over the last couple of years, which has really devalued the dollar. On top of that, now you do have this perfect storm of Biden's weakness, his war on American domestic energy production, the Ukraine war, and as you point out, because of all of these things, we've got America's enemies led by China forming a new economic bloc. And all it would take at this point now, because we're at this pivotal moment, Will, is for Saudi Arabia, who has indicated that they're open to this, to say, you know what, we're going to be open to considering other currencies to trade in oil. If that were to happen, there would be a complete implosion of the global economic system, but certainly the American economic system. And if that were to happen, you'd be looking at sky-high inflation, just raging Weimar Republic kind of inflation. If you think inflation is bad now, just wait. But more importantly, we would lose our economic dominance and we would lose our superpower status.
Now, I used to work with Monica Crawley, very smart.
Yeah,
Very
this
smart.
clip alone had our accountant sort of writing to us and saying like, oh, you know, she's like, I didn't even know this about the dollar not being backed by gold currency. We've talked about that before a lot. But, you know, this is a scary way that she's putting it, but I don't think that she is fear mongering. I actually like what she says here, that it's been a real privilege to have a hegemonic dollar, because how did we get there? How did the world come to have the dollar as the underlying currency of most global transactions? Well, the answer is by cheating. I'm going to tell you a little story. This comes from a very old out-of-print book called The Hidden Hand of American Hegemony. Because it's a real book, it's not in any kind of digital form. I had to take a screenshot of it, and I'm sorry that this looks a little bit too busy, but I want to tell you this story anyway because it's kind of fun and also naughty and also crazy. Okay, did I sell it? Good enough?
Naughty and crazy.
It's all of those things. So G.K. Chesterton once, I want to start from the second line. In 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon was putting Islam through its paces. He flew on a government plane to Saudi Arabia to meet with the Minister of Finance because he was worried about the future of the international financial system and the place of the United States in it. Simon had put an extremely violent video on the in-flight movie system, and he was laughing uproariously while consuming prodigious amounts of whiskey. Alcohol is illegal in Saudi Arabia, though drinking it might seem like the national pastime to a new visitor in the kingdom. Ministers of state are not supposed to roll off their planes drunk, but according to another government official on the trip, this is exactly what Simon did. In 1974, the financial problems facing the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury were enough to drive any level-headed soul to his cups. The federal government was running an ever-increasing budget deficit, and it was Simon's job to finance it. But that year, the Treasury was preempting 62% of the debt markets in this country, and Simon called the cost of paying interest on the national debt just frightening. So he's realizing the economy is about to collapse. He needs to get himself drunk and get on a plane to Saudi Arabia because they can't pay their debts, because the currency is collapsing and they can't even pay the debt on it. At the same time, the price of oil was getting higher and higher. Financial markets are in danger of collapse, partly because of the new inflows of capital from oil exporting nations. The strain could be believed, Simon thought, if the OPEC nations put a larger amount, we're going to flip the page, of their accumulated funds into investment in this country, or if the American public spends less and saves more. Since it was unlikely that President Richard Nixon, while facing impeachment, would succeed in urging the public to spend less and save more, Simon turned to OPEC for funding. And how did that meeting go? I'm going to skip a few paragraphs. Well, his answer to the myriad problems faced by the Treasury and the United States in general, and indeed by most of the world, was to sell bonds. In 1974, Simon negotiated a secret deal so the Saudi central bank could buy U.S. Treasury securities outside of the normal auctions. A few years later, Treasury Secretary Michael Blumenthal cut a secret deal with the Saudis so that OPEC would continue to price oil in dollars. These deals were secret because the United States had promised other industrialized democracies that it would not pursue such unilateral policies. So it was through these secret meetings, drunken, underhanded dudes in secret rooms, deciding that the dollar could no longer compete on the merit, so they had to cheat. I mean, it leaves us all now to wonder, what if the U.S. had competed economically without cheating? Where would we be? Would we be where we are now with sort of an American dominant culture? And I'm not saying it's dominant, but I'm saying there's a perception of it as dominant.
I don't know.
That's a crazy story, right?
It's a crazy, hypothetical to think about, right? If we didn't do it in this sort of underhanded way.
Because he makes the point in this book that France was really, fighting it out to be the underpinning currency of oil trade as well, and all international trade. And the United States just they edged him out they played dirtier. They played a dirtier set of cards. And it's a great book. I've invited the author on the show, I think, a couple of times, and hopefully he responds to me. So the question is, if the dollar, is it the dollar that gave the U.S. license to control economies and world leaders and resources, and without that seniority, would it still be a superpower, as Monica Crowley mentioned? Well, perhaps not, and world leaders may be grabbing their chances to edge out U.S. hegemony. We saw over the weekend when Bolivian President Luis Arce, I think it's Arce, expressed interest in joining a lithium policy group with other Latin American countries, including Mexico. Now, he didn't mention the U.S. specifically, but he almost doesn't have to, because you can recognize them in his quotes. He's basically saying that this is necessary to prevent the U.S. from subverting the market the way it does with oil and gas. He says we must be united in the market in a sovereign manner with prices that benefit our economies. And one of the ways already promised by Mexican President López Obrador is to think of a kind of lithium OPEC. He says we don't want our lithium to be in the Southern Command's crosshairs, nor do we want it to be a reason for destabilizing democracy, destabilizing democratically elected governments, or foreign harassment. Well, who does that? With what resource? That's easy. That you don't have to pass the SAT to fill in those blanks. This would be a consortium of sorts of South American countries creating an organization like OPEC, but for lithium, a major component of the electronics you are probably using to watch this show, I would imagine. Drive your EV if you've got one. According to Reuters, Bolivia has an estimated 21 million tons of untapped lithium resources, the most worldwide, in an area of sprawling salt flats delineating the so-called lithium triangle that includes northern Chile and Argentina. Here's a lithium map from the British Geological Survey. The largest producers of lithium are currently Australia, Chile, Argentina, and China. The U.S. only mines lithium in Nevada, even though by some estimates, the U.S. is home to about 4% of the world's lithium reserves. The Inflation Reduction Act actually did put aside money for lithium mining, but it will not be enough to satisfy the demands for increased electronics and electric vehicles.
No, and this is all of our own doing. I've covered this on the show repeatedly, which is the United States has shot itself in the foot. I mean, both in uranium production and lithium mining.
Yes.
I mean,